Hello, everyone. I'm Don Keelan, and welcome to the show on civil discourse. With my co-host Andy McKeever. Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning, Don.
Welcome. We have a show today that's going to be in two parts. The first part will be discussing a little bit about the upcoming elections, national elections, and the other part will be on the lack of civics in our education system. So maybe we'll have time to get it all in. Let's hope we can.
Absolutely.
Andrew has approached me and was wondering why so many people in the Republican Party support Donald Trump. I think the latest polls show that he's up 60%. The closest rival of the 15 running against him, or running in the primary, I should say, not against him, but running in the primary, is they're at 13%. Why is the question? Is that not the...
Yeah, I'm just curious, you know, the loyalty and the passion that voters seem to have for the former president is striking, I think. It seems like most polls I've read show him with an unwavering support among at least 30 to 40% of the electorate, and overwhelming numbers of people who identify as Republican voters. And it's just interesting. He had an eventful presidency. He's had an eventful post-presidency. He's going to be checking out a lot of courthouses up and down the East Coast. And so, yeah, I guess, you know, in the spirit of the civil discussion and how we could reach out to each other, you know, across, how do we understand different positions, I guess, better is something that I've always been interested in. So what explains, do you think?
Well, I think we both are searching for civil discourse in our discussions, and why the other side has their opinion, and attempt to find out in a civil way. Well, first off, allow me to say that I don't speak for anyone, any groups. So I really don't know why, other than my own opinion. Let's make sure that's understood.
Well, and ditto for me too.
And the second thing, let's make sure that it's understood. I don't support Donald Trump as a person. I'm appalled that the way he acts and so forth, particularly towards so many individuals and what have you. And the fact that he does not bring the respect to the office that I've seen in the past, it just appalls me. Having said that, I think what's important to know, there's another side to Donald Trump, and that is, you know, what he stood for when he was president in dealing with presidential matters. Right? Yes, I know. Right now, he's under indictment in 4 different jurisdictions. With something like 91 charges. He's been impeached twice, and he, and he's had a number of civil suits. Setting all that aside, getting back to the basic question: why do people support him? I believe it's what he stood for when he was the president, and the issues. Right? For example, let's take one. That comes to mind immediately, and that is the immigration issue. I gather, if I recall, he stood for the fact that thousands upon thousands of people want to come to America. We can bring them in the legal way, or we can continue doing it the way it was coming through the southern border. But if it's going to come through the southern border, then they're going to have to stay in Mexico and then be processed. That was his plan. And to reinforce that, he was going to build a wall. Right? That all got eliminated when he left office, and now we have ourselves a major crisis. Right? And not that far from where we're sitting right here today in New York City. I think the mayor said that he has Mayor of New York has 121,000 immigrants that they're trying to house and trying to deal with. And I grant you, the governor of Texas sent a few of them up there, but not all of them. I mean, of the 121,000, 107 13,000 came up on buses. The rest just came up. The other one was another major issue is that we're so depleted on oil today, and look at what's happening at the gas pumps. That when he was president, the people saw that their gas prices were nowhere near what they are today. We were exporting oil and gas from this country. That's not the case today. We're begging the OPEC to give us oil, all right? And when Trump was president, he wanted us to be independent of all these countries that we were dependent on getting oil from, Venezuela, OPEC, and others. So the other side sees these issues, and they're saying, we're not there. We're paying the price of having eliminated those things that Trump stood for, and at the same time, that they've all been changed, and they're not happy with what they're seeing. They too, I think, again, I don't want to speak for them, but I'm going to make a generalization. The folks that support Trump, they too are appalled at his personal behavior. So, with that, I'll.
Well, lot to unpack there. I mean, my take on the Trump phenomenon has sort of grown more out of a sense of grievance, I guess, that working class families felt in the wake of particularly in the wake of the 2008-2009 recession, that a lot of folks lost homes, the mortgages went underwater, jobs, a lot of jobs went south, and that tapped into a lingering sense on the part of a lot of people that the so-called elites didn't really care about them. They were just these working folks that showed up and did their job, and they didn't count for much. I think that's a mistaken assumption, taken as a grand whole, but I think that was a factor. And then you can tie in a few other cultural aspects to it as well. But I want to speak a little bit to a couple of the points you raised there, because those are important ones. I mean, the immigration situation, I don't think anyone is happy with, and my own feeling on that is that a really good way to kind of ease that quickly would be to expedite the issuance of work permits for a lot of these folks who come here, and yet they're not able to work right away. They want to go to work, take whatever jobs they can, and as we all know up here, there's help wanted signs out all over the place. It seems like one easy fix would be to expedite the process whereby folks who arrive on a bus in New York City from Texas or wherever they came from, is that they could within a week or two get the paperwork so that they could go work somewhere and start supporting their families. I think by and large, unlike the characterization that Mr. Trump gave when he walked down the golden escalator at the Trump Tower and announced his candidacy and said they were rapists and drug dealers and whatnot. No, they're ordinary working people that want to have a better future for themselves and their families. I think by and large, that's got to be, I don't see where they're that much different from any of the generations of immigrants that arrived here in the 18th, 19th, early in the 20th centuries, who wanted to build a better life than they were going to be able to do in the old country. But again, it's a really complicated subject, and I know the whole system wasn't set up to handle the numbers of immigrants that we're seeing. Part of that, I think you could say, under Mr. Trump's presidency, the State Department, lost a lot of the people that were processing some of these documents, and that slowed things down. That may not account for the thousands of people that are kind of come here and are in New York. It's a real problem, and it's not good. There's much more I'd like to say on the subject, but I'm going to move on. I think crime is another factor that a lot of the folks who are diehard supporters of the former president point to. There's a perception that I think the other side wants to defund the police. I think that was an unfortunate slogan that came up, which was very easily misunderstood, and I don't. But you know, that's another factor I'm seeing. I'll take issue with you a little bit on the oil and the inflation and the gas prices, because we didn't have a war in Ukraine going on when Trump was president. I don't think that necessarily was because of his brilliance at handling Vladimir Putin, but you know, it was just the way it worked out. But you know, the Russian invasion of Ukraine sent oil prices skyrocketing and contributed to a lot of the inflation we saw last year. My understanding is that we are now back in the business of exporting oil to other parts of the world. I could be wrong on this, but I think I remember reading somewhere recently that we're now exporting oil. We have you know, supplies to handle the domestic market. I know we're also withdrawing from the strategic oil reserve. Yes, gas prices at $3.70 a gallon for regular is not what anyone wants to see, but neither is it $4.70, which it was a couple of years ago.
Last year.
So, last year, right.
Let me, may I?
Absolutely, jump in.
I want one question on the immigration, all right, and that is, just getting people jobs doesn't answer the question. I mean, just picture it right here. Let's say 100 immigrants came to Manchester tomorrow, right? And we have jobs for them. No question about it. Up here, we could really use workers. All right, it's more than just finding a job. It's finding a house. It's finding medical services. Yeah. It's finding education. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot more to it.
Oh yeah.
And when you come in through the legal system, you know, the regular immigration system, you are sponsored. You have these things available to you when you come into the country through the regular immigration process. All right, they're there for you. But when you have millions coming through, and on the other hand, many of them, we don't even know where they are. So it's just, so the average, I say the average person, I hate to use that term, the Trump supporter doesn't delve into all the nuances of immigration. They just see the headline.
Yeah.
And they see hundreds of people coming across night after night, and they're saying, geez, under Trump, we didn't have this. You know?
But we did. I mean,
you had some of it. You didn't have it. He was working on it, and he had the wall. And but Andrew, they saw this. They saw what he was doing, as opposed to let's open the door.
Well, the wall was never going to be the answer to that. I mean,
it may not have been. It may not have been. But the thing is, he was working on it. All right, and that's what they. It's perception.
Right. And they perceive that Biden's administration is not making it the same priority.
Getting back now to the oil, the first thing Biden did, and this really upset the middle of the country, a lot of Trump, where there are a lot of Trump supporters. 1 hour into him arriving at the White House on the day of the inauguration, when he was inaugurated, he banned leasing. Or drilling on federal lands, and he shut off the pipeline, the Keystone Pipeline. Mm-hmm. Now, whatever the technical side, the legal side, the philosophical side of all of that is, you know, we'll hold that aside. But again, going back to the Trump voter, I'm paying more for gas over here, and he shut the pipe over here. Right? That's what they see.
Cause and effect.
Right? The crime. When they see blatant, not shoplifting, but looting going on, city after city, right? And the homelessness, and they see these images. They don't get into the depth of you know, what's really going on, like you and I maybe, and you know, people who are really willing to spend time reading about the issues. Right? They just get it on social media, or they get it on cable news, and that's it. Right? And that's what they see. So that's a whole new part of this, why we have over 70 million people who voted for Trump. Now, again, I want to make it very clear. I've known the Trump family for a long time. And I've seen his antics in New York, And I said, God, he's going to run for president? Are you kidding me? Right?
Yeah, well, it's on one level hard to understand, and then another, yes. I mean, I think absolutely there's a lot you can look at and say, oh my gosh, we didn't have a homeless problem 7 or 8 years ago like we do now. We didn't have the immigration problem. Just to kind of make one last point on that, you know, a reason I think a lot of people are coming here and maybe coming in greater numbers is, well, I mean, clearly their home countries plagued by gangsterism, crime, violence, lack of job opportunities, and also I think, you know, we're going to see, if not already, then very soon, the whole climate factor kicking in. Or in Central America, you know, people who might have been able to make a living on a farm, let's say, may not be able to do that in 10 or 20 years, and that's going to contribute to it. But
and coastal people who live on coastal areas, they're going to lose their
right.
their homes if they live on the coast.
I mean,
if in fact the oceans do rise.
Yeah, I mean there's so many aspects to this that, you know, I find hard to understand. One of them is the evangelical wing within the GOP voter sector. I mean, for people who seem to kind of place a very high value on good conduct and living the right way, to find a hero in someone like Trump, who, whatever else you may think about him as a policy person, gosh, he's got a interesting, some would say a checkered background in history. But that's one connection I've never really quite gotten, I have to say. But I think it's interesting to think about, you know, how do you talk to people? Well, how does both sides kind of talk to each other around this? I mean, I think there's a lot of misperceptions on both sides as to why, you know, the former president would be a great president that would get back in office in 2024, versus those who just seem to struggle to kind of say, well, why, like myself, why is it that so many people are just diehards? That 35 or 40% of his support just never seems to get shaken.
Well, the thing is, you, if this might help, you recently sent me a PBS program that was on PBS about an interview with some folks in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania.
Right.
And there were about a dozen folks sitting around a table. They announced they were all Democrats, and the interviewer, I think
Judy Woodruff, yeah.
Woodruff, wanted to know, you know, why is there such a divide in the country? Why are actually asking the same question I think we're asking here today, and that is why do they think? And these are all Democrats now, young, most of them young folks. Why do they feel the country is you know, there's such support for Trump, and given you know, the way he behaves and so forth? And it was almost as if when I did watch that, and I felt. It's almost as if there's feeling Trump created this thing about name calling and so forth, as if it came from him. We've had that for years here. I mean, when I was watching that program, I said, didn't these people ever sit down and watch the TV program Archie Bunker? Right? Archie Bunker was...
We're dating ourselves here, Don.
Well, we might be, but the thing is, there were two parts of it. One was the Archie Bunker, who was one of the most, you know, and of course it was a TV sitcom, but nevertheless it did meant to reflect what was going on. But he was a bigot, make no mistake about it. And at the same time they were saying how divided the country is today, and you and I have had this discussion. Right? There's the division in the country today, in some respects, is a lot softer than what it had been many years ago in many other different areas, and the experts who know a lot more about this than I do keep going back to the 1960s, and in fact on that show, on that PBS show, the interviewer Judith did as well. You know, when we had the issues with women getting their rights, civil rights with the African Americans, the war in Vietnam. right? The tremendous disagreement that the people had with President Johnson. And of course we had, in the middle of all that, we had the rioting in 183 cities, based, not on the Kennedy assassination, but on the Martin Luther King assassination. I mean, it was a difficult time. The country was divided. And the climaxing, I guess, with the shooting at Kent State in 1972 over the war, and the protesting that went on in over 300 colleges. And that's a fact. At one point in 1972, over 300 colleges had major protests going on. I mean, you don't see that today.
I remember it well.
I'm sure you do. We both do.
Well, yeah, I mean, and you can go back before that. Well, you can go back to the founding of the country, basically. I mean, the Constitutional Convention in 1776, a lot of choice conversations going on. The election of 1800 between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson is often pointed to as a low point in terms of the quality of discourse. I often think, my God, thank God they didn't have Facebook back then. That would have been the end of it right there.
Excuse me, and as Michael Cohen, Rabbi Cohen said, one of the problems, when we had him on the show here not too long ago, one of the problems today is the social media, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's often pointed to, and you know, I sometimes I find myself thinking, oh yeah, well that's a convenient excuse, but it's hard to not think that the way people can sort of send information, quote unquote, across to each other. And I think another big difference between now and certainly the 1960s is that the whole way people get information is much more fractured than it was, I think, back then. I mean, back then we had 3 major television networks and a handful of well-respected newspapers: Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, Boston Globe, and others. You also had a much stronger infrastructure of small local papers in towns where people could get information from. That I mean, we're losing on average 2 small town newspapers a week across the country, which I think is a disaster that's unfolding right before our eyes, but I'm not sure what the answer is. But anyway, I think the way people get their information now is much more fractured than it was back then. But you're right. I mean, it's not the first time we've had this kind of level of polarization. I don't know. It's funny though. It feels more, more intense somehow, or at least more intractable. It's like back in the '60s. I remember thinking that, well, once we kind of get past the civil rights question and the Civil Rights Act that passed in 1964 has a chance to work, and the Voting Rights Act in 1965, and eventually the war in Vietnam is going to be over. And once all those things are done, we'll kind of get back on a more unified track. I'm not sure if that ever really happened or not, but I don't get the same sense that the issues that seem to be dividing people nowadays, whether it's the economy or climate or crime or immigration, foreign policy, have a sell-by date, or by in 3 or 4 years you could see these issues sort of finally kind of easing off a little bit. And
well, let me. I'm glad you came to that point, because I think one of the ways in which we can work on those issues, if in fact we sit down and we have a discussion, we segregate the personalities, right? I mean, just the way we started this program, when we talked about Trump and his personality. But over here you got all these issues that you're talking about. If we can have a discussion where we segregate the delving into the personality of the candidate or the individual, and works on the issue, maybe we can find common ground. Maybe we can find solutions. But as long as we keep putting the personality up front, we never get to solving the issue.
But part of the problem with Trump, I think anyway, and I'm going to speak for myself, is that the personality is so intercommingled with the policies. I mean, the kind of person he is his whole projection of you got to be strong all the time, and I'm never wrong, I mean, the way he's distorted some things that have happened, not just from November 2020 on to January 6th, but just throughout his presidency, he was, you know, he didn't always kind of speak to the heart of the matter. I just think that his personality is so intercommingled with what the policies are.
Well, you can say the same. Not that I want to get too far afield here, but you can say the same thing about Bernie Sanders, right?
Yeah.
If we had forget Trump that as if he never existed, but just deal with Bernie Sanders. I mean, he's the great divider. He makes it very clear he doesn't like wealthy people, right? So right away you've got yourself a division, right? And so forth. And if Trump were to go off the scene entirely, we would be having the same discussion about Ron DeSantis.
Maybe.
Right? He may not have some of the really, really poor moral standards that Trump has demonstrated, but nevertheless, we would find something wrong. Not we, but the media and so forth, and then it gets fed in. Regardless, and take DeSantis out of the equation, put in Nikki Haley. Right?
Even better.
Well, all I'm saying is, it's the way we deal with politicians today. We deal with the personality of that politician, and we don't spend the time dealing with the issue. It seems like the personality takes precedent. Now, I grant you, Trump allows. He's got a monopoly on that, for God's sake. But that's his stock and trade. He gets, as we said on another show, in the last election, he got over $2 billion worth of media coverage, the equivalent of $2 billion, by the way he every morning he would come out with some kind of Twitter statement. And guess what? The press covered it.
Yeah, I know.
Even now, every time he gets an indictment, he he goes up in polls. So,
well, it is newsworthy. And it's we could have another long conversation about how the media kind of played into his hands on that. I guess just real quick before, I know we wanted to pivot to the civics education side of this before we have to run, but I think the concern with Trump and the personality is that I think some people perceive a bit of an authoritarian streak within Mr. Trump, where I think he would like to be, like Viktor Orban, who's the president of Hungary, where basically, what I want to do is what I want to do, and we're just going to do it. He was frustrated a lot in his first term in between 2017 and 2021 because, he had advisors who were saying, hey, no, you can't do that. And he was, at least at that point, prepared to listen. I'm not sure a second Trump administration we would see that same hesitation. He would just sort of want to kind of do things that I think my concern, and I'd love to have a conversation with someone who feels otherwise about this, is that he would, to serve his own ends, business or otherwise, be prepared to undermine certain of the basic democratic elements that have guided the country since 1776. That's just my feeling. I worry. That's the difference, I think, between a Trump and, let's say, a Nikki Haley or a Mitt Romney. There are other, or even a Ron DeSantis. I don't think there would be the same level of anxiety about, okay, if worse comes to worse, if people conclude that Joe Biden's too old to be president and he's not quite as quick on his feet as he used to be or whatever, that you could feel like, well, the country will go on, and we'll survive and it'll be okay. I don't think a lot of people have the same sense of calmness about a second Trump administration.
Well, we can. Again, we want to pivot here. But just to leave it, we have our own lieutenant governor, who's going around the state advocating that we should have 4 more members added to the Supreme Court. All right, that's a separate branch of government he wants to change.
Mm-hmm. Right? Like Franklin Roosevelt wanted to do back in the 30s.
He did, and guess what? It never happened.
Right.
All right, but here again, change the government, change the way we operate. You can So when you make the comment about Trump, you can also, where he wants to change government and so forth, you got it right here. But we need to pivot.
Yeah, we do. Unfortunately, yeah, we wanted to talk a little bit about civics education. We had a program here a couple of weeks ago where we had State Senator Brian Campion and the Secretary of State Sarah Copeland Hanzus and a student from Burton, Christopher Alfano, in to talk about civics education. I mean, I don't know. I haven't gone around and done an inventory of all local schools and how much time they spend on civics education, whether at the elementary, middle, or high school level. So I'm just going to speak from sort of a sense. I don't really have, like, well, at this school in the 8th grade, they study civics education all year long, or for half the year, whatever. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. I guess I just have a concern overall that, a lot of students and a lot of older residents of the country really have a very shaky understanding about how the government works, who does what. And I often wonder if that kind of contributes to this sort of whole situation we're seeing now. I mean, I would love to see every voting resident, every registered voter, have to take the same test that an immigrant, to return to that subject, has to take. They have to take a test to qualify for U.S. citizenship. I think it's 10 questions, multiple choice questions about how does the government work. Pretty basic, simple questions. How many senators are there in the U.S. Senate? How many representatives? What's the supreme law of the land? Nothing that anybody would have to spend hours in a library researching. And my guess would be that a lot of people would struggle to get, I think they have to get 8 right out of the 10.
But if you ask that question today of, a youngster or someone who's very familiar with the use of a smartphone, they would just go, Alexa, how many U.S. senators are in the Senate? Now I have the answer. Why do
Right. Well, yeah, and I know we've talked about this, and it's like, well, that's kind of one of those things where it's nice to know that 2 and 2 equals 4 without having to use a calculator. There's some kind of...
The thing I think you're struggling with in this area is what's lacking, in my opinion, in the system, is the critical thinking. Right? If I was moderating a group of youngsters, or whether it's youngsters or older people, on civics, I could care less if they knew how many U.S. senators we had. What would be more important is what does the Senate do, and how do they resolve issues. Right? That would be more important, and also to take the group and split them. You support this issue, and this group here doesn't support it. How do you reconcile? How do you come together to make to make a law when a number of people just may not agree with it? And yet that's the critical thinking, and that's what's important for those people to understand. Yes, you can disagree, but ultimately, in the end, we have to come together.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And maybe that's a good place to leave this conversation. But I'm going to plant a seed for another conversation, because I think we need to spend a little more time unpacking some of this stuff. The Electoral College. I'll throw this out. We can plan to talk about this maybe at our next program, or start with it, and continue on with civics education. The electoral. We're the only major industrialized country that has an electoral college that decides how elections are decided. It's not just how many votes did somebody get. It's when we're talking here about national presidential elections. Obviously, it doesn't apply to the U.S. Senate or Congress or others. But we've seen in 2016 when Donald Trump ran for president for the first time, he didn't get the majority of the votes. Hillary Clinton got more votes than Donald Trump did. But because Trump carried certain states, some of those swing states, he got more votes in the Electoral College. That may have had some utility back in the 1780s, 1790s, or early 19th century when the Founding Fathers devised this system. I have a feeling that it was devised to keep a sort of it's kind of an anti-populist measure when you really look at it, because it's devised to keep a restless majority of people from taking over. I think now it's kind of swung in the opposite direction, where it sort of makes it easy for a restless minority to kind of run things, because basically, it just seems there's something wrong where the person who gets the most number of votes for presidency doesn't wind up being elected. It just happens because where the votes came from.
I'm so surprised that I'm sitting here today with you, and you're posing this question. But on the other hand, I'm not surprised. But and that is, you're from Vermont, all right? We have what, 2 U.S. senators?
Yeah, I know you're going with this one.
But let me go there.
Yeah.
All right. We have 640,000 people represented in the U.S. Senate by 2 senators.
Right.
All right. Our on the other side of the country, we have California.
Yeah, 37 million.
There are 40 million people
right.
in California. Right?
And they get 2 senators.
They have 2 senators.
Yeah.
Right? It's wrong for the misrepresentation. I mean, look at that. And then you can throw in Florida and Texas and all these other places, and just our neighbor next door with 18 million people, 2 senators. And our 2 senators have as much say as their senators, and for those people.
Right.
Now, the other thing is, and we can have this debate, not debate, but discussion, right? What you're forgetting is, I don't think you're forgetting it, but maybe you're not, we're losing sight of the fact the United States is a republic. We're 50 separate states. Right, and that's the way it was created. When it was created, it was only 13. Right? But the thing is, the founding fathers wanted us to be a republic, right? Not one country, one government, where the states had power, and it's the states. And interesting enough, going back to the political side for a minute. It's one of the reasons why the Dobbs decision was decided, was the abortion decision should be up to the states. How do they want to treat it? And then obviously if the states can't address something, it does fall, if not by default, to the federal government. But the thing is, and because the government, since the 1930s, has taken over so much, and it's gotten so much bigger in so many different areas, we forget the fact that we are a republic, right? And obviously, here in Vermont, we of the $8 billion we spend, I think $6 billion of it comes from the federal government.
Right.
So I don't know. Do we have time? We're running out of time.
The clock on the wall says it's time to go, I think. But these are all great questions, and I think we now know what we're going to be talking about at our next show anyway. We can pick up where we left off here. Right? That whole states federal republic question is a fascinating one, and definitely worth unpacking. I guess it's my own feeling that that may be a model that, I don't know, has outlived its usefulness. It just seems like that's a very easy way for people to, I don't know. I need to think about this a little bit more clearly, but...
Well, you grew up with it too, by the way, in the civil rights thing. It was very prominent back then. The state said the federal government has no right in telling us how to...
at some point, there are certain basic rights, like voting, that I think ought to be uniform. It's the same rules everywhere, right?
Well, in many cases, obviously, there is. But all I'm saying is, the issue is not new.
No.
And
we will add to
now
it.
that you want to change, I guess we're going to have a show where, the basis will be, you want to change the structure of the United States. I mean...
no, not everything, but after 220 or 250 years, maybe time to... I mean, that's one of the other things. Trying to amend the Constitution now. When was the last time there was a constitutional amendment that got passed? A long time ago, right?
Well, not that long ago. But the thing is, I can just say this: you want to be very careful and deliberate when you start to change the Constitution. And that's what there's only been 28 amendments. I think it's 28 over 200 and some odd years. Is that it?
I think we're going to leave it there, Don.
I want to thank everyone for being with us today. I want to thank my co-host, and you can see we can have a civil discussion, and we're still here.
Yeah, and we'll be back.
Thank you, and have a great week.